the show that keeps you ahead of the global curve. A conversation you'd want to be a part of.
A place where news becomes an engaging exchange.
We bring you stories that impact your present.
This is World DNA.
Join the conversation.
Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. It's 9 p.m. IST and we are coming to you live from the WION headquarters in Noida, India. Let's get started. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dissolved the six-member war cabinet. The question is, what triggered this move and what happens now onwards? What are the reactions? Our top story breaking down the developments for you. And here's a look at what else is lined up for you on the show tonight. China is expanding its nuclear arsenal. We tell you what the numbers are looking like. We also focus on the big question: which country is China's arsenal aimed at? A flesh-eating bacteria is spreading at a record rate in Japan. What do we know about the disease? Should you be worried? We also tell you all about the world's highest rail bridge as India makes history and completes a trial run of a railway engine atop the bridge that's taller than the Eiffel Tower. All this and more coming up. Netanyahu has strengthened his control over the Israel-Gaza war. The Israeli Prime Minister has ended the 6-member war cabinet. He has dissolved the national unity government formed when the war started in October 2023. A move that exposes the rift between Netanyahu and the Israeli military. Now, the big question is, what happens next? What does this mean for the war in Gaza? Let's find out. Here's what's happened today. At around 2:30 p.m. IST, it was reported that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had disbanded his inner war cabinet. Israeli officials broke the news to Israeli media on Monday, but the decision was announced on Sunday evening. The Israeli Prime Minister had announced the decision at a meeting of the Political Security Cabinet the previous evening, but it did not come as a surprise. It was clear that Netanyahu's far-right coalition partners had been advocating for a new war cabinet. And this pressure, you see, was building since the centrist leader, Benny Gantz, quit the emergency government. The war cabinet was formed after Gantz had joined Netanyahu at the start of the war. But earlier this month, Gantz left the wartime government. And what was the reason for his decision? Well, just to put it simply, Netanyahu's failure to form a strategy for the Gaza war. Gantz cited the Israeli Prime Minister's failure to devise a future for the Gaza Strip. After Gantz's departure from the government, Netanyahu faced growing calls from the far-right members of his coalition, namely the Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir to join the war cabinet. And for months, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have pressured Netanyahu to oppose a ceasefire plan that would involve releasing Israeli hostages. They have insisted, in fact, that Netanyahu keep his original promise to achieve total victory against Hamas. And they also pushed for Israeli reoccupation of the Gaza Strip, a policy move that the Israeli defense leaders staunchly oppose. However, Netanyahu turned them down. He feared that meeting their demands would intensify the strains with international partners, including Israel's most important ally, the US. So rather than let them into the war cabinet, Netanyahu dissolved it. In fact, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich's continued influence, even from outside the war cabinet, was one of the reasons for the resignation of Benny Gantz last week. Gantz, a centrist, had said that he had joined the cabinet to ensure that the war was conducted responsibly, but he has since concluded that it is Netanyahu who poses insurmountable obstacles for Israel. How exactly? By refusing to commit to a day-after strategy for Gaza. But all this was last week. What triggered the latest move by Netanyahu then? With Gantz's resignation a week ago, Netanyahu reportedly told ministers that the war cabinet was no longer necessary. It's important to note here that this move comes amid a difference of opinion between Netanyahu and senior IDF commanders. On Sunday, Netanyahu reportedly criticized plans announced by the military to hold daily tactical pauses in fighting along one of the main roads into Gaza. The idea basically is to facilitate the delivery of aid. But according to the Israeli official, when Netanyahu heard the reports of an 11-hour humanitarian pause, he turned to his military secretary and said that this was unacceptable to him. On the same day, while announcing his decision to disband the war cabinet, Netanyahu stated, and I'm quoting, in order to reach the goal of eliminating the capabilities of Hamas, he had made decisions that were not always acceptable to the military echelon. He also criticized the military, saying, "We have a country with an army, not an army with a country." And Netanyahu's actions suggesting increasing confidence. His poll numbers have also improved since Gantz's departure, causing Gantz's polling to decline significantly. Opinion polls suggest that most Israelis support the government's aim of destroying Hamas. So then what does Netanyahu hope to achieve from this decision? Two things. First of all, the decision is a deliberate snub to Netanyahu's far-right allies in the coalition, including the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who had been eyeing a seat in the war cabinet after Gantz's departure. And now Netanyahu will make decisions in meetings with his own advisors instead of having to listen to Ben-Gvir. A new war cabinet with heavy influence enjoyed by Smotrich and Ben-Gvir would have further tested relations with allies like the US, and Netanyahu needs the support of the US. Remember, Washington is still supplying Israel with arms, and there has been little to show that Netanyahu wants to stop his war in Gaza. Secondly, and but perhaps most importantly, the move gives Netanyahu more power, more control over decision-making. When it comes to the war with Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, which then brings me to the all-important question. How will the dissolution of the war cabinet actually affect the Israel-Gaza war? Apparently, the impact will be minimal. Decision-making will reportedly shift back to the security cabinet with potential significant political ramifications. Netanyahu will reportedly hold discussions about the Gaza war with a small group of ministers, including the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and the Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer. Reports saying that Netanyahu will now use sort of a kitchen cabinet. He will speak to some smaller advisors on what decisions to take regarding the continued prosecution of the war. As far as the situation in Gaza is concerned, at least 37,347 Palestinians have been killed, 85,372 injured since the war started. The fighting, especially in Rafah, has created a humanitarian crisis, and now Israel is under international pressure to address the issue. Across the border with Lebanon, the Israelis are moving closer to a larger war with Hezbollah. In recent weeks, in fact, fighting between Israel and Hezbollah has intensified. Could it lead to a wider escalation? Quite possibly. And in that case, a wider conflict could have devastating consequences for the already volatile region. The next 24 hours will present a better picture. China is expanding its nuclear arsenal. If you have been reading the headlines today, then you already know this. The question that we are asking tonight is, which country is China's arsenal aimed at? SIPRI, or the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, has released its annual report. This report points at China's growing nuclear arsenal. SIPRI says China's nuclear stockpile has grown from 410 warheads to 500 warheads. This is between last year and this year. Meaning, in just a year, China has added 90 warheads to its nuclear stockpile. And what's more, the data was last collected in January 2024. Who knows how many more nuclear warheads China actually added to its cache in the last 5 months? Why is China adding to its nuclear arsenal, you ask? Which country is this buildup really aimed at? You see, China has a dispute with almost every neighbor. China shares borders with 14 countries. It has disputes with almost all of them. This is China, the world's second largest country, with a humongous appetite for more land. It claims all of Taiwan. It is fighting with the Philippines over the Scarborough Reef and the Spratly Islands. These islands are in the South China Sea, and China claims nearly all of this vast water body through its 10-dash line. It has disputes with several countries over claims in the South China Sea. I'm talking about Vietnam, Brunei, Malaysia. China has also staked claim on a rock in the Yellow Sea called the Socotra Rock. This rock, by the way, is some 4.6 meters below the sea level. Also, South Korea claims that the Socotra Rock falls within Seoul's exclusive economic zone. But China wants it. And China also has disputes with Japan over the Senkaku Islands. These islands are in the East China Sea. China has engaged Indonesia as well in a dispute over Natuna Islands. China claims the Paracel Islands and is fighting Vietnam over it. China has an unresolved conflict with North Korea in the Sea of Japan. It has unsettled border issues with Bhutan. China has encroached upon around 36 hectares of Nepalese land. China even had a border dispute with Russia. The two countries share a 4,200-kilometer long border. There were border clashes in 1969. China has disputes with India over land along the Himalayas. So in which of these disputed areas is China planning to fire a nuclear weapon? The CIPRI report says that for the first time, China has placed some of its nuclear warheads in a state of quote-unquote high operational alert. Let me say that again, high operational alert. For the first time, China has kept its nuclear warheads loaded on missiles. It has deployed at least 24 nuclear warheads. But then, who are these nuclear warheads aimed at? And where exactly are they stationed and pointed at? There is no way of knowing really, but we highly doubt China has put its warheads on alert for a smaller non-nuclear country. Look at what's going on in the South China Sea. Chinese maritime militia and Coast Guard are jointly harassing a country. We will be telling you all about it later on in the show. What you need to know at this point is China is highly unlikely to use a nuclear weapon for a smaller non-nuclear country that it can tackle using conventional firepower. Also, China claims it will not use or threaten to use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear weapon state or against a nuclear weapon-free zone. The Philippines, remember, is not a nuclear-armed state. Neither are Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, or any of the countries China has disputes with at sea. So then we are back to that question, who are the nuclear weapons for? Russia? China, you see, has unresolved issues with Russia. But will Beijing actually fire a nuclear weapon towards Russia is the question. The Chinese President Xi Jinping has called his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin his best friend. The two countries have become extremely close since the start of the Ukraine war. Putin was in Beijing in the month of May itself. He met his dear friend Xi. The two leaders released a joint statement. It read, and I'm quoting, "There can be winners in a nuclear war and it should never be fought." And still, China is expanding its arsenal. And Russia continues to have the world's most nuclear warheads. The latest CIPRI report puts the number at 4,380. Will they ever use it against each other? Not until things drastically change. So are China's nuclear weapons for America? There is no doubt that the US is likely to top China's list of adversaries. But then here's the thing. China will not dare to fire a nuclear weapon at America. And I will tell you why. You see, while Chinese nuclear capability may be expanding, it is still no match for America's nuclear might. The US has over 3,700 nuclear warheads. That's over 7 times of what Beijing has. In short, China will be wiped out if it fires a nuke at the United States. So then are these weapons for India? China is believed to have significantly improved its theater nuclear systems. These are systems meant to target immediate neighbors or forces in its vicinity. Beijing has procured and also developed a range of shorter range nuclear weapons. The number of delivery vehicles also has been increased. Tensions have escalated along the Himalayas. In the year 2020, China mobilized troops and tanks in some areas on the LAC in Ladakh. China started construction activities in some of the areas claimed by India. On the 15th of June 2020, the two sides clashed in Galwan. Some 300 PLA troops attacked Indian soldiers with clubs wrapped in barbed wire and nails. 20 Indian soldiers died. China said its troops sustained minor injuries. Estimates say the number could be anything between 38 and 45. In the seas as well, China is provoking India. We have spoken at length about Chinese construction at a Maldivian atoll close to India. My point is, tensions are rising with India. So is the Chinese nuclear force India-centric. China's nuclear buildup also appears to correspond with the rising geopolitical tensions, by the way. China watchers saying for years China maintained a nuclear arsenal of about 200 warheads, but now China is very quickly adding to its nuclear firepower. What was the trigger? Was it the Galwan skirmish or India's investment in border areas? In 2023, China appointed a new chief of its nuclear arsenal. By 2027, China is expected to have 700 nuclear warheads. And by the end of this decade, that number would have crossed 1,000. In short, China is increasing its ability to inflict damage. What signal is China really trying to send out then? Is China trying to use the increased stockpile as a political weapon to arm to its neighbors, grab more land, and unilaterally change the status quo in the disputed areas? Or is the plan even more vicious? If you ask Beijing, it will tell you that China is committed to a defensive nuclear strategy. In other words, China swears by a no first use policy. But then can you take China by its face value? And what does all of this mean for India? Increased preparedness. New Delhi is not blind to Chinese design, and the CIPRI report also makes it amply clear. It points one thing very clearly, that while Pakistan remains the focus of India's nuclear deterrence, New Delhi is placing growing emphasis on weapons capable of reaching targets throughout China. How many nuclear warheads does India have? 172, says CIPRI. For the longest time, India maintained a no first use nuclear policy. But in the recent years, India has made it clear that the country's nuclear policy will also, quote unquote, depend on the circumstances. This is what India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh said during his visit to Pokhran in 2019. Let's now shift our attention to India, where the Indian Army has been armed with a cutting-edge tool to secure the borders with Pakistan and China. This powerful addition to its arsenal is a suicide drone. It's called Nagastra-1, aptly dubbed the silent killer. Designed to carry out precision strikes and surveillance missions, the silent killer will provide the Indian Army with a significant strategic advantage. The deployment of this advanced technology will enhance the Indian Army's operational capabilities and further fortify border security. What does it do? What triggered this response? Over the next few minutes, we will tell you all there is to know. The first batch of the indigenously developed Nagastra-1 has been delivered to the Indian Army by an Indian company called Solar Industries. This delivery marks a significant milestone in India's defense preparedness and self-reliance in military technology. The Nagastra-1 is a type of loitering munition designed to act as an aerial ambush system. Its primary function is to hover above targets and execute precision strikes with GPS-enabled accuracy. The Nagastra-1 can achieve a remarkable precision of 2 meters. In kamikaze mode, the Nagastra-1 can neutralize hostile threats by directly striking the target and destroying itself in the process. The drone can also fly at altitudes above 4,500 meters, making it difficult to detect by radar. What's more, it is equipped with day-night surveillance cameras and a warhead capable of defeating soft-skin targets. Additionally, it has an abort, recover and reuse feature, which means that if the target is not detected or the mission is aborted, it can be called back and safely landed using a parachute system. This feature makes the Nagastra 1 superior to similar systems developed by advanced countries. The Nagastra 1 drones offer a multitude of strategic advantages specifically designed for precision strikes. These silent killers target enemy training camps, launch pads and infiltrators, effectively minimizing the risk to the soldiers. Their silent operation is achieved through electric propulsion and a low acoustic signature. This makes them highly suitable for infantry operations. Furthermore, these drones provide a cost-effective solution for engaging relatively smaller threats like groups of infiltrating terrorists at border areas. Developed entirely within India, the Nagastra 1 drone boasts a remarkable 75% indigenous content. This means it has greatly reduced India's dependence on foreign sources. And this emphasis on domestic production has led to substantial cost savings in comparison to similar systems acquired from overseas vendors. Moreover, these drones are engineered to operate in extreme temperatures and high altitude conditions, which further adds to their strategic value. Similar loitering munitions have seen extensive use in recent conflicts like the Ukraine-Russia war and the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. So the fact that the Indian Army is investing in these advanced technologies shows a broader strategy to procure standoff weapons from the domestic industry. With the proven success of the Nagastra 1, there is strong potential for exporting these munitions to allied foreign countries. The importance of tools for the Indian forces lies in the increasing challenge of dealing with aerial threats surpassing that of ground-based threats. While fencing and round-the-clock surveillance by soldiers help to secure the border, the emergence of drone technology has added a new layer of complexity to border security. Indian intelligence agencies have reported that a large number of drones are being used to supply weapons and drugs from Pakistan to India. Recently, India's Border Security Force has also deployed a drone hunting team at the border post to counter these threats. In the year 2022, the BSF detected over 311 Pakistani drones attempting to enter Indian territory, with around 258 instances reported just on the Punjab border alone. Indian security forces say that narco-terrorist groups have adopted new ways of smuggling weapons and funding for their activities. And they do this by sending consignments of drugs and weapons via drones. Ukraine has become the war for unbelievable profits. The rate at which Ukraine is burning weapons is unbelievable. You know what else is unbelievable? The fact that no one seems to really be complaining. Because then, who will complain is the question. The countries that are supplying these weapons, some of their economies heavily depend on the sales made by the defense industry. So then why will they complain? What about the defense industry? Their revenue, of course, depends on the demand, on the orders coming in. So why will they complain? Now, such is the demand, such are the profits, and the race to deliver, that the global defense industry is rushing to hire. A survey has found that companies in the arms industry are recruiting at the fastest rate since the end of the Cold War. As per a Financial Times survey, American and European defense and aerospace companies are looking to hire thousands of people this year. US contractors Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics alone have nearly 6,000 job openings. At least 10 companies are looking to increase their workforce by almost 10%. The biggest driver? Conflict. The Financial Times survey mentions Europe's missile champion, MBDA. The company is owned by BAE, Airbus and Leonardo. MBDA makes air-launched missiles Storm Shadow and Scalp, they have both been widely used in Ukraine. Now, MBDA plans to hire 2,600 people this year, 2,600. That's 17% of its current workforce of 15,000. How much profit do you think this company is even making? And why just the defense companies after all? The dealers also have become richer in the last 2 years. In Ukraine, arms dealers are exploiting the war. They are driving the price of weapons sky high. The cost of many weapons has risen almost sixfold since the start of the war itself. Take, for example, the Soviet-era 122 mm Grad rockets. They are designed to rain down on enemy positions. When Russia invaded Ukraine, dealers were selling these ammunitions for $900 a shell. Now the asking price is $6,000. The price of 152 mm rounds for D-20 howitzers jumped from $1,200 to $5,727. The asking price for 125 mm tank ammunition has gone up from $1,200 to $7,420. What changed since the beginning of the war? The demand for these weapons, also the appetite to profit from the war. You see, the scope for profit is limitless. Analysts believe that to turn the tide of the war, Ukraine will need to spend more than what China spends on defense. China's defense budget, by the way, is $200 billion. $200 billion. Ukraine will need to spend 3 times the amount, or even 4 times. Also keep in mind that it is not just Ukraine that the orders for weapons are coming from. The war has nudged countries around the world to modernize their armies and to be war ready. Japan and Germany have significantly increased their defense budget. In December 2023, Japan's cabinet approved the country's largest ever defense budget. How much is that? $55.9 billion. Earlier this year, Germany said it could increase military spending to as much as 3.5% of the economic output. ICANN, or the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, says global spending on nuclear weapons has increased by 13%. In 2023, nuclear-armed countries spent a record $91.4 billion on their arsenal. The US, for that matter, spent $51.5 billion. China spent $11.9 billion. Russia spent $8.3 billion. Followed by the UK, which spent $8.1 billion on nuclear weapons in 2023. France spent $6.1 billion. These numbers tell a story. They tell you how Ukraine has become a war for unbelievable profits. Meanwhile, in May, Europe's gas imports from Russia surpassed those from the US for the first time in nearly 2 years, highlighting the complexity of the region's efforts to reduce reliance on Russian energy. Data from consultancy ICIS revealing that Russian gas accounted for 15% of the total supply to the EU, the UK, Switzerland, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina and North Macedonia, while US gas fell to 14%. This shift occurred despite Europe's push to decouple from Russian energy post the Ukraine invasion, underscoring the challenges in completely severing ties. One-off factors like a major US LNG export facility outage and increased Russian gas via Turkey contributed to this trend. Additionally, Europe's gas demand remains low, with storage levels near record highs. The inconsistency in Europe's energy strategy is evident. Despite urging countries like India to cease buying Russian oil, Europe's increased imports of Russian LNG suggesting a degree of hypocrisy, to say the least. And this dynamic reflects the difficulty in balancing geopolitical stances with practical energy requirements. However, this reversal may be temporary. US LNG production, after all, is expected to rise, and Russia's capacity to maintain its European market share is constrained. The expiration of the transit agreement between Ukraine and Russia also poses risks to future supplies. The European Commission is seeking to bolster alternatives like expanding the southern gas corridor from Azerbaijan, though such capacities remain insufficient at the moment. India has made history. It has completed a trial run of a railway engine atop the world's tallest railway bridge. How tall, you ask? This is a 15-meter long bridge that's taller than the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Located in India's Jammu and Kashmir, this railway bridge has been built at a height of 360 meters above the Chenab riverbed. Here's a detailed report.
Over the weekend, the Indian Railways Minister Ashwini Vaishnav shared this video. It was the maiden trial run on the long-awaited Sangaldan-Riyasi rail route in India's northernmost region of Jammu and Kashmir. The engineering marvel that is the Chenab Bridge is part of a larger Indian Railways project. It's called the USBRL project. It stands for Udhampur-Baramulla-Srinagar Rail Link. It connects parts of Jammu and Kashmir to the rest of India. This route is being built in a phased manner over several decades. Why does it take so long? Well, this is a route that passes through mountain ranges and regions that are generally inaccessible for heavy equipment and construction materials. The entire project costs about Rs 35,000 crores, which is well over $4 billion US. Phase 1 of the USBRL project, covering the 118-kilometer Kazigand-Baramulla section, was operational in October 2009. Subsequent phases saw the inauguration of the 18-kilometer Banihal-Kazigand section in June 2013 and the 25-kilometer Udhampur-Katra section in July 2014. Whereas the 48.1-kilometer Banihal-Sangaldan section is slated for completion by the year's end. The Chenab Bridge is an engineering marvel. It is built to endure all imaginable extreme phenomena. Among the tests performed are high-velocity winds test, extreme temperatures test, earthquake-prone test and hydrological impacts due to water level increase. What's more, the bridge will be able to withstand wind speeds up to 260 kmph and will have a lifespan of 120 years. It is truly built to leave a lasting legacy. This is also a region where the terrain, topography and the weather pose significant challenges. Even hauling heavy equipment and materials for construction is a Herculean task at such heights. According to India's Northern Railways, the train service from Ramban to Riyasi via the world's highest railway bridge will begin soon.
Amid the rising tensions in the South China Sea, Beijing's Coast Guard has claimed that a Philippine ship and a Chinese vessel collided near the Spratly Islands on Monday. The Chinese Coast Guard claimed that the Philippine transport and replenishment ship ignored repeated warnings. Beijing claims almost the entirety of the South China Sea and has deployed coast guards and other boats to patrol the waters. And it has also turned several reefs into militarized artificial islands. The area, in fact, has seen a number of confrontations between Chinese and Philippine ships. The shore lies about 200 kilometers from the western Philippine island of Palawan and more than 1,000 kilometers from China's nearest major landmass, Hainan Island. The Chinese Coast Guard said the vessel deliberately and dangerously approached the Chinese ship in an unprofessional manner, which resulted in a collision. However, the statement made no mention of injuries or damage to either vessel. For months now, China and the Philippines have exchanged claims of risky maneuvers and collisions at the Second Thomas Shoal, which is within the Philippines' sovereign economic area. Meanwhile, a new law for the Chinese Coast Guard went into effect on Saturday. Foreigners who are accused of trespassing in the disputed sea may be detained by it. Manila has accused the Chinese Coast Guard of barbaric and inhumane behavior against Philippine vessels. And President Marcos has called the new rules a very worrisome escalation. Beijing claims almost the entirety of the South China Sea, like I said, brushing aside competing claims from several countries. As you can see the situation on the map. A dangerous infection is gripping Japan. It is spreading at a record rate. The disease is capable of killing within just 48 hours. Sounds scary. Should you be worried is the question. Let me tell you what we know so far. First, which infection are we talking about? What kind is it? This is a bacterial infection and it is rare, but at the same time, it is dangerous. It is called the streptococcal toxic shock syndrome, or STSS. It is also called the flesh-eating disease. The mortality rate is 30%. How is it caused? It's most often caused by the bacteria called Group A Streptococcus. And concern is growing that the disease will continue to spread. And why is that? Because highly virulent strains have been detected in the country, and naturally experts are worried. Last year, the number of cases of the infection hit a record 941 in Japan. Here's some background. Let's take you back to the year 1992. That's when STSS was first reported in Japan. And since then, there have been an average 100 to 200 confirmed cases annually. In 2019, there were 894 cases. And like I said, the 2023 figures triggered alarm because they beat that number and touched a record 941. What about this year? Data from the National Institute of Infectious Diseases revealing that Japan has already recorded nearly 1,000 cases this year alone, surpassing last year's numbers. What are the symptoms of the disease? Most with the infection do not develop symptoms, and if the symptoms do appear, there will be a sore throat, also skin infections. But in rare cases, if the bacterium reaches the bloodstream, muscles, lungs, it can cause low blood pressure and can prove to be fatal. And if there are serious complications, the infected tissue needs to be removed. Like COVID-19, streptococcal infections are transmitted through droplets and physical contact. The bacterium can also infect patients through wounds on the hands and the feet. So proper hygiene is extremely significant. The recommendation from the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is that people should wash their hands often. Also, if they are prescribed antibiotics, they should take them. Also, very importantly, they should care for wounds and clean them. But what's worrying is that the exact reason or the cause behind the surge in infections is not clearly known. Perhaps it is linked to the rebound of respiratory diseases after the country got into the post-pandemic phase. And speaking of the pandemic, are we heading towards another pandemic? Is bird flu going to cause the next pandemic? Let me tell you what a US expert has said. He has suggested that bird flu could potentially be the next pandemic. Who is this expert? His name is Robert Redfield. And who is he? He is a former CDC director. CDC is the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It is the National Public Health Agency of the United States. So if a former director of the agency is saying that, the warning absolutely cannot be taken lightly. He was speaking to US-based TV network News Nation. He has basically said that he really does think it is very likely that we will at some time, it's not a question of if, it's more a question of when we will have a bird flu pandemic. He also pointed out that the mortality rate from bird flu is likely to be much higher as compared to COVID-19. That's how serious this is. Just for context here, bird flu has infected mammals like seals, raccoons, bears, cattle, primarily due to contact with infected birds. Scientists are on alert for changes in the virus that could signal it is adapting to spread more easily among human beings. According to the World Health Organization, the current risk of bird flu virus to the general population is low. And by the way, 24 companies are working to develop an avian flu vaccine for cattle as the virus spreads among US dairy herds. This is as per the Agriculture Secretary, Tom Vilsack. According to the US Department of Agriculture, bird flu has infected 90 dairy herds across 12 states since late March. 3 dairy farm workers also have been infected with the virus, 2 in Michigan and 1 in Texas. Federal officials had earlier said that further spread of bird flu among US dairy herds presents additional opportunities for human infections, while urging farms to take enhanced biosecurity measures in order to contain the virus. The thing is, a vaccine could curb the risk of bird flu spreading to new species and lessen potential economic losses for dairy farmers, but may take years to develop. And what's also concerning is what researchers recently found. In raw milk samples spiked with high amounts of bird flu virus, small amounts of infectious virus were still detectable after treatment with a standard pasteurization method. Let me now ask you this. What's your favorite comeback moment from the world of sport? Football fans would say Liverpool's miracle in Istanbul, perhaps. Baseball lovers would bring up Boston Red Sox's triumph in 2004. Many would throw their weight behind Tiger Woods winning the 2019 Masters. But how about the one where a footballer comes back from the dead? Quite literally. Yes, we are talking about Denmark's Christian Eriksen.